A young man walked into a doctor's office at an airport to ask whether his ear was well enough to let him fly home. About an hour later, he was sprinting across the airport grounds, climbing a fence strung with barbed wire and disappearing into a field of sunflowers taller than he was. He left his luggage on the floor of the office. He left his mobile phone. Nobody has seen him since. That was the 8th of July, 2014. It is now 12 years later, and the doctor who sat across from him in that room, the last person known to have spoken to him, says he still cannot explain a single part of it. His name is Lars Mittank. He was 28, from Marne, a small town on the flat, windy coast of northern Germany. He worked, he watched football, he had a mother, he telephoned often. Bulgaria was the first time he had ever left his own country. He flew out on the 30th of June with friends to Golden Sands, a strip of high-rise hotels and late bars on the Black Sea coast, just north of the city of Varna. It was an ordinary package holiday. For 6 days, nothing happened that anybody thought worth remembering. And here is where I have to be careful with you, because this case has a problem. It is one of the most watched missing person stories on the internet. It has been told thousands of times, and somewhere in those 1,000 tellings, the story grew details that the police record does not contain. So we are going to do this differently. The German Federal Criminal Police Office keeps a public file on Lars Mittank. It is 4 sentences long. I am going to tell you what is in it, and then I'm going to tell you what is not, because the gap between those two things is the most interesting part of this entire case. The record says this. During an altercation on the 5th of July, he took a blow to his left ear. Afterwards, he could barely hear on that side. On the 7th of July, he saw a doctor who forbade him to fly. The following morning, he went to a doctor at Varna Airport, and at around 10 in the morning, he suddenly left the practice and the airport for no apparent reason, leaving behind all of his luggage and his mobile phone. There has been no contact with him since. That is the whole official account. Read it again in your head and notice what is missing from it. There are no attackers in it. There is no motive. Nobody chases him. There is no panic, no famous last words, and no mention of the security footage that made this case famous. 4 sentences, and then a silence 12 years long. Start with the altercation, because it is the foundation everything else was built on. In the small hours of the 5th of July, the group stopped at a fast food place. Lars waited outside while the others went in. When they came out, he was gone. They found him later back at the hotel. The next morning, he told them what had happened. He said he had argued with some other German men about football, and that they had paid local men to beat him. 4 of them, he said. Hold on to that sentence, because it is the single most repeated fact about this case, and it is not a fact at all. It is what Lars told his friends. There were no witnesses. His friends were inside. Nobody else ever reported seeing an attack. The 4 men, the football argument, the paying, all of it comes from one frightened young man's account of a night he spent alone. The injury itself is real. That much is medically documented. On the 7th of July, a specialist examined him and found a ruptured eardrum. He was offered surgery and refused it. He was told he must not fly, and he was given a course of antibiotics to stop the ear becoming infected. The drug was called Cefzil, 500 milligrams. It is a cephalosporin, a very ordinary class of antibiotic, and if you have ever had a bad chest infection, you have probably taken a cousin of it. It is not licensed in Germany. Remember that box of tablets. It becomes the center of this entire case, and then, very quietly, it falls out of it. His friends flew home on the 7th of July as planned. Lars could not go with them. He checked into a cheap hotel in a poorer district of Varna, on his own, in a country whose language he did not speak, with an injury in his head and a box of tablets he had been given by a stranger. That night, he began to telephone his mother. This is the part of the story that everyone knows, and it is the part where I have to be most careful with you, because there are 2 versions of those calls, and only one of them is on the record. The official version, in the flat, careful language the police actually use, is this. There were several unusual and worrying calls and text messages to his mother. He asked her to block his credit card, and he said that something was wrong with the hotel, without saying what. That is all of it. That is the entire documented content of those calls. Block my card. Something is wrong with the hotel. No more than that. The other version is the one you have heard, that he sobbed down the line that 4 men were hunting him, that people were trying to kill him, that his mother could hear his heart pounding. Those lines are real in their own way. They come from Sandra Mittank, describing her son's calls on German television 2 years afterwards from memory. A mother remembering the last time she heard her son's voice is not lying. But a memory is not a transcript. Nobody has ever published what was actually said on those calls, and there's a real difference between a police summary that says he was worried about the hotel and a documentary that says he was screaming that he would be murdered. The second one is a better story. The first one is what we know. What is certain is that he did not sleep. Sometime before dawn, he left the hotel, saying he was being followed. At about 5 in the morning, a taxi driver spotted a young man at the roadside, waving to be stopped, and drove him to the airport. He arrived at about 6. He telephoned his mother, and he sounded relieved. He had made it. He was inside the building. He had his passport, his ticket, his luggage. The flight was hours away, but he was there, and whatever had been frightening him in that hotel was behind him. He was, by any reasonable measure, safe. Then he called her again. This time he told her that they would not let him leave, that they would not let him fly. He did not say who they were. At around 9, he went to the airport's own doctor, a man named Kostov, and asked to be examined. Kostov would later say it was a standard checkup. Nothing about the ear surprised him. What he remembered was the young man himself. He was, Kostov said, really nervous and erratic. And he did not trust the medication he had been given. And then, while Lars was in the room, a man opened the door. Kostov did not know him. He assumed, he said, that the man worked at the airport. The man was there for a moment and then he was gone. Nobody has ever worked out who he was. And this is where the story people tell reaches for its ending. The pursuers had found him. The hunt caught up. But look at what we actually have. A doctor saw a man he did not recognize open a door in a building where thousands of strangers walk past every hour. That is all. Everything else is something we added. At 11 minutes past 10 in the morning, Lars Mittank stood up and ran. The security cameras caught him. It is a single exterior camera, and it is the reason this case is known at all. It shows a young man in a yellow shirt coming out of the terminal at speed and crossing the open ground beyond it. That is what the footage shows. Not a chase. Not a struggle. One man, running, alone, with nobody behind him in the frame. You have probably seen a longer version than that. Him pacing hotel corridors, him hiding in a lift, him peering from behind a curtain. I could not find a single German or official source for any of it. It exists only in the retellings. Somewhere along the way, the internet gave this man footage that may never have existed. What the record does hold is where he went. He crossed the airport grounds to the perimeter, and he climbed a fence about 2.5 meters high, strung along the top with barbed wire. Think about that for a moment. He was not fleeing a room. He was leaving a country over its wire with nothing. Beyond that fence was a field of sunflowers about 2 meters tall, and past it a road. Witnesses said they saw a man running along that road, and then the ground simply closes over him. That is the last of it. A yellow shirt going into the sunflowers in the middle of a hot Bulgarian morning. He left everything. All of his luggage, his mobile phone, his flight ticket unused, a bus ticket unused, and one thing that has always bothered me more than the rest of it put together. His mother had wired him money. He never collected it. A man in a psychotic terror does not stop for money, but a man running for his life does. A man planning to disappear does, above all. Whatever Lars Mittank went into that field to do, he went without the one thing that would have let him keep doing it. The search was not lazy. They put dogs into that field. They flew drones over it. They went through it with infrared cameras that can find the warmth of a body under crop cover. They found nothing at all. In June 2015, Germany's biggest unsolved crime program gave him a whole special. Nothing came back, so the case needed an answer, and it found one. The antibiotic. The theory goes like this. Cefsil did something to his mind. The paranoia, the certainty that he was hunted, the flight into a field, all of it was a rare reaction to a drug he had been handed by a doctor in a foreign country. And I want to be fair to that theory, because it is not stupid. It is the most medically literate idea anyone has had about this case. A Bulgarian pharmacist asked about it on German television, said a link could exist. He was careful. He said it would be a very rare side effect, and that it would probably need something else alongside it, alcohol or another drug. 2 specialists went further. They contacted the police themselves and said the mistrust and the running from imaginary pursuers pointed to a psychosis of the schizophrenic type, and the science is real. Cephalosporins do this. Rarely, but they do. There is a study of antibiotics and psychosis that puts real numbers on it. As a class, cephalosporins came out with more than double the odds of a psychotic episode. Some individual drugs in the family came out at 4 times. The suspected mechanism is almost elegant. These drugs can block a receptor that quietens the brain, and with the brakes off, the brain races. So there it is. A frightened man, a foreign drug, a rare reaction, a field. It is tidy, it is medical, and for a decade it has been the answer this case settles on. And then the airport doctor opened his mouth. In 2018, in the only interview he seems ever to have given about it, Kosta Kostov said something that nobody has really reckoned with. He said Lars never took the antibiotics. He said Lars had not even filled the prescription. He said, and this is the part I keep coming back to, that the behavior could not have been a result of the drug, and that he cannot think of a single reason why the young man left his office in such a panic. He said he is still confused. Sit with that. If he is right, then the explanation that has carried this case for 12 years is not weakened. It is gone. You cannot have a reaction to a drug that never entered your body. The tidy medical answer requires Lars to have swallowed those tablets, and the last man to see him says the box was never even opened. Although, be honest about this too, that quote lives in one magazine interview, given 4 years afterwards by a man who is himself part of the story, and who has been accused of telling it differently at different times. The police never adopted it. And Kostov also said Lars did not trust the medication, which is at least the shape of a man who would not take it. It is the most important thing anyone has said about this case, and it is also the most fragile. After that, the case becomes a long list of nearly. In 2019, a lorry driver in eastern Germany was certain he had picked up a hitchhiker who was Lars. Long hair, a beard, sunken eyes, a man living rough. His family let themselves hope. The investigation was thorough, and it was not him. There was a photograph from a street in Dusseldorf that people were sure was him. It came to nothing. There have been sightings around Varna on and off for years. They arrive without photographs, so there is not even anything to weigh. Every single lead in 12 years has ended the same way. In November 2024, his mother did something extraordinary. She had read that in America decades ago, missing children were printed onto milk cartons. So she got her son onto smoothie bottles. His face and an age-progressed image of the man he might be now went into more than 30,000 supermarkets across 3 countries. It was the first time Germany had ever done that. Leads came in. Some came from Bulgaria. None of them found him. So where does that leave it? The police are careful, and their carefulness tells you everything. There are no concrete indications that the missing man is still alive. It is possible, they say. The probability is rather low. No evidence he is alive. No evidence he is dead. Just the wire and the field and the silence. The file is still open. A detective in Itzehoe put it as plainly as anyone has. None of us knows what happened. With every year, the chance of finding him alive gets smaller. Even so, we are not giving up, and his mother is still waiting. She says her thoughts are that he lives. She thinks perhaps he lost his memory and is somewhere quiet and thinly peopled, being nobody in particular. She has also said in the very same moment that she has to prepare herself. Both of those things live in her at once, which is what waiting actually does to a person. Here is what we actually have. An ear that was really hurt. A doctor who really did forbid a flight. A second doctor, a small room, an unremarkable morning. A man who stood up at 11 minutes past 10 and ran over a wire fence into a field, leaving his passport, his phone, and money he had asked for and never touched. Everything else, the 4 men, the shouted last words, the corridors, the hunt, is something we built afterwards to make the shape bearable. Because the truth of it is smaller and much worse. A 28-year-old on his first trip abroad became frightened of something we cannot see, in a room we can picture perfectly, and walked out into a summer field, and the world simply closed behind him. 12 years of dogs and drones and smoothie bottles and hope, and not one thing has come back. Not a body, not a sighting that held. Not a word. Somewhere in Bulgaria there is a fence with wire along the top of it, and on the other side of that fence the sunflowers still come up every summer, and every summer they close over the last place anyone can prove Lars Mittank stood. If you would like to sit with more of the world's unsolved mysteries, stay a while. Sleep well.